Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we return for yet another one of our summer transfer window overview updates here on Last Word on Spurs. If you are listening for the very first time, you can find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms, we're of course on X, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook too. And look, back alongside me, we've got a special guest, but another guest of mine. He's the co-host. He's actually becoming the runner of this train as to where we're going. Lee McQueen is currently in orbit, should I say? Lee's in orbit. He's in Spain at the moment. He'll be back with us very, very soon. But for now, and for hopefully the next 8 or 9 days to come, for any of your breaking news, you're going to turn to the wonderful Matty Hayes. Matt, thank you so much, mate. Love to see you back alongside me. How are you?
I'm good. I must admit, Ricky, it's brave putting all of this in my hands, but I admire that bravery, and I'm looking forward to hopefully what will be a very busy couple of weeks for Spurs. We're hearing that things might get a little bit busy soon. So yeah, hopefully there's plenty to talk about in the coming weeks, and I'm looking forward to it.
Listen, mate, it's in the very, very safe hands of, I would say, a description of 𝐼𝐸 as a comparison to you, apart from the set pieces and the corners. Apart from that, we're absolutely fine. It's in the safest hands. And unless we turn into those concerns about the set pieces, we're going to be absolutely fine, Matty. Thank you so much. Now, joining us on this Last Word on Spurs, we're going back to the ages here. We've got a man that joined us back on the audio days where, look, I think, listen, we've got a very much loyal base of fans out there that remember us back in the audio days when before you could see our beautiful faces on your screens. So it gives me my wonderful pleasure to welcome back to Last Word on Spurs, a man that you hear the dulcet tones of pretty much every week, firing the questions to Ange Postecoglou in the pressers, giving us the gossip we need to hear, we want to hear, we have to hear. We've got the wonderful Tottenham Hotspur correspondent for PA Sport. George Sessions is back on the show. George, it's been far, far too long. How are you, mate? Love to be back and join us.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on, and I'm just glad my headphones are working now because I was panicking about 10 minutes ago, thinking they weren't going to work. So hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear, and yeah, we'll have a good fun night talking about transfers. You know, Spurs are making one by the sounds of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I say, George, we've got the pleasure of having you on here, and you make no hidden point on this, the fact that you are a Spurs fan covering Tottenham, which to some would probably be the ultimate dream. What is it like for you? Because I've got to ask you that first question. We've spoken obviously times throughout the last few years, but give me a feeling what it's been like covering the club for the period that you have done. You've covered it since Mauricio Pochettino, for viewers and listeners out there that don't know that. Give us an insight into what it's been like as a fan covering Tottenham.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, when Spurs score a 96th minute winner against Liverpool, it's brilliant as a fan. And then the journalist in me is like, oh, I've got to write about this now. I've got to change the whole story. But no, it's an amazing privilege to be able to watch my team. You know, sort of, you know, most weeks I do all the home games basically for PA, and quite a lot of the away games as well. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I was doing it for the local newspaper for a few years. Luckily enough, got out to Madrid for the Champions League final, which was an incredible 24 hours, minus the 90 minutes of the actual result. But yeah, when I returned to PA to do Spurs, it was actually the year that Conte left, and I thought it was going to be a great year, Champions League, Harry Kane, and yeah, there weren't many highlights. So yeah, last year was good fun with Ange, and I'm excited about what can happen. Actually, it feels like the club's on a good trajectory again. We had a few years of sort of treading water in it, and it feels like it could be an exciting time again for Spurs. And hopefully, it's, you know, talking about winning games and not managers losing their jobs.
I mean, on that point, you mentioned about losing their jobs. I mean, not to say that you've been the reason for this, but you've overseen quite a few managers that have departed the doors at Hotspur Way. What has it been like for you? Obviously, you was there when Pochettino arrived. You've then overseen the likes of Mourinho, Conte, Nuno for a brief period. We know how challenging that was for some journalists in terms of the pressers. Matt's face there says it all in terms of how challenging that might have been. How different has it been under Ange so far, and how much are you enjoying seeing him on a week-to-week basis? Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, no, I really have enjoyed Andrew. I mean, you know, he's not always amazing with the press. He's not sort of, you know, the best mate of journalists, but I guess from a fan's point of view, you get the sense of how much it means to be Tottenham manager. And I don't feel like we've always had that in the past with certain managers. I don't need to name who, because we sort of know those managers that maybe felt like they were above Tottenham. And, you know, you can sense with Ange, it really means a lot to be Tottenham manager. And he's really good. You know, I think I've got a lot of time for him because you can ask him a rubbish question, but he'll think about it and he'll give you an answer. You know, I remember being asked about, how many sort of, tourists Spurs were attracting, and he come out with an amazing response, like saying, I'm a tourist basically, and I know so many managers that would have just shut that down and moved the subject on. So yeah, he's been a real breath of fresh air, and he's been good fun as well. You know, he doesn't take no prisoners in the press conferences, so you do have to try and think of good questions and ways to phrase them as well. Otherwise, you'll get him turn around telling you that he's got the pictures of the trophies. He doesn't need to think about lifting the trophies. So no, he's been good fun.
Brilliant, fantastic. Look, I'm sure we're going to cover this in more detail during the show. So absolute pleasure to have you here, George. We can't thank you enough. And again, George mentioned it. We'll be getting into some of your, what we are looking at in terms of transfers during this summer transfer window. It looks like Spurs are on the case of making yet another one that is fair to say is at the moment, hopefully I'm not saying this wrong, Matt, I'll let you come in this point, maybe splitting the fan base to some degree. Would you agree, Matt, that maybe the signing, and we'll bring George back in a second there, that Spurs are looking at in terms of this Korean winger, Min-hyuk from 𝐷𝐿 FC. I hope I pronounced that correctly. We'll come into it in a bit more detail in a second, but can you understand there being a bit of a two-way split on the fan base on this one? Some, again, excited. It might be, again, a very young, promising winger, maybe the heir to Toney. Don't want to go too far on that, but then many are looking at it thinking, and again, another 18-year-old. It'll be the third one this window. I think many have seen the likes of Arsenal now starting to do their business. Aston Villa have got Onana over the line. United have got 𝐷𝐭𝐳𝐽. It feels like other clubs now are starting to accelerate their moves in this window, and Spurs are still pretty much focusing on a lot of players for the future. Where are you, Matt, at the moment in regards to this window?
I'm in a fairly similar situation to where I was on Monday, that I'm calm but not happy. There's of course a lot of work still left to do in this transfer window. I think there's a faction of this fan base that no matter what we do, they'll be upset about the business that we do. And I mean, look, that's fine, that's their prerogative if that's the way we want to support the club. But I think I understand the frustration that if Yang is going to be our third signing in the window, all of our signings are 18 years of age. We do need to balance that out with more experienced signings. And I made that point myself on social media yesterday. And some people argue that Maddison, Romero's son are that experienced. But I mean, we need experience coming in as well, because we need to improve that first team. It's a first team that couldn't get into the top four last season. I know there were a lot of injuries and a lot of suspensions throughout the season as well. But regardless, it's a team that couldn't get into Champions League football. So we do need to make improvements in that team. And there's experience that needs to be balanced with youth. My biggest problem with some fans who are calling out the natures of our signing is I've seen a few say we're only signing kids when United are signing 𝐷𝐭𝐳𝐽 and Euro. Euro's also 18. You know, just because there's more money spent in the player, he's still 18. Yang, Bergvall, Gray are still 18. And we need to remember a little bit more often that players develop at different ages and at different rates. So Bergvall and a Gray who's only 18, I think Gray has shown in pre-season that he has everything it takes to be a first team player. Bergvall is definitely very, very close to that level, but coming in from a very different league and a different style of football in the 𝐼𝐸𝐴𝐿 probably has a little bit more work to do. But being 18 and your level of development don't always go directly hand in hand. And I think we need to remember that as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, all valid points. I think I've been quite honest in this window and said for me so far, I think where I'm at, I've got 9 days away now. So the good thing is you won't hear too much negativity, because when I come back, Spurs are going to have made loads of signings. And Matt already dusted them up for you and brought them to your notice in terms of over here. And I'll just be coming back really to celebrate and party the fact we've got hopefully 3 or 4 genuine first team experienced players that have come through the door and are going to take Spurs to the next level. Because I think that's where I'm at in terms of the window for me. I genuinely need to see Spurs go into this market now in these next 10 to 15, 20 days before the season starts, and generally bring in players that I think can directly walk into the first team. Look, it's great to see Spurs signing players for the future. The future, of course, is the lifeblood for Spurs, is what they're targeting. But at the same time, if you genuinely want to shorten that gap to the likes of City, hate to say it, Arsenal, Liverpool now have got a new manager, Chelsea in the background as well. For me, Spurs have got to be making players that are effectively going to impact the first team. And I think that's where, again, there's that frustration at the moment there. You could say that, look, Bergvall looks like a great one for the future potentially. Again, we'll have to see how he develops. Again, Archie Gray looks like, from what we've seen in pre-season, good lad, fairly competent footballer. Are these players going to really take Spurs to that ultimate next level? And that's where there's a question mark. And I think, again, this is where many fans in this window, not all, need to see Spurs go in there and actually address the first team squad and bring in players that are going to genuinely walk into the first team. And I think that is where, again, you've got that frustration at the moment that Spurs have yet to show any real intent in terms of making those statement landmark signings. And look, some will go all the way back to Jurgen Klinsmann in the 90s to say that was our last statement signing. So again, I think the window for some out there will say it's really yet to get going, despite Spurs will be telling you they've signed 3 and are about to get a 4th one over the line. Look, let's discuss in more detail if we can in terms of Tottenham. It appears closing in on their full signing of this summer transfer window. We understand Spurs are closing in on the signing of Jan Min-hyuk from Gwanghwamun FC. The 18-year-old is expected to complete a move to Spurs by the time the club face a K-League 11 at the Seoul World Cup Stadium in his native South Korea on the 31st of July. Now, the teenager would be expected to officially join in January if the deal is completed this summer. For those that don't know about the player, our understanding is that he's an 18-year-old winger who predominantly plays on the right, but can also play on the left. He's a Korean youth international. He has scored 7 goals in 24 senior matches for Gwanghwamun and become the youngest K-League scorer since 2013 when netting his first goal for the club in March. He's expected to become the latest Korean footballer to join Spurs after current captain Son Heung-min and those who, of course, will also remember Lee Young-pyo. He will become, like I say, Spurs' 4th summer signing, including Werner and Bergvall, and the 3rd 18-year-old to sign. Medical to follow after negotiations are complete. I want to bring in Jules to this conversation. Jules, bless him, is battling all kinds of technology to get on this show tonight. We can't thank him enough. We've gone from a phone back to a desktop. George, I want to bring you in. It appears that Spurs are closing in on the signing of Jan Min-hyuk. What's your reaction to that as a Spurs fan, as a journalist looking in? How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, fingers crossed you can hear me okay. I mean, he seems like the natural heir for Son Heung-min, doesn't he? You know, from Korea, and also plays on the left as well, I believe. So yeah, I mean, fingers crossed he's gonna join it. It does sound like it's very close now, and by the sort of the looks of it, Spurs are going to try and announce it when they're going to arrive in South Korea next week. So yeah, hopefully he can be half as good a player as Sonny has been for Spurs. But I guess it's another one that's like a Pape Sarr, like a Destiny Udogie, and you sort of hope it's going to be like that rather than going down the Brian Hill route, who is probably someone we're going to talk about in a little while, but is another guy that Spurs signed as a young teenager, exciting prospect, and it hasn't quite worked for him. But yeah, I think it's good that Spurs are kind of finally, I think it's fair to say, exploring the Asian market, especially with Ange and his background, because he clearly knows how well those players and how talented those players are, and how they can make a difference over in Europe. So yeah, hopefully that one gets over the line, and Spurs have got another exciting young teenager in their ranks, but I don't think he's going to be anyone to be affecting the first team within the next year. I'd say I believe he's going to go straight back on loan, and it'll probably be a while until we see him actually as part of the first team. Yep.
You can tell those out there, look, I've had 4.5 hours to try and learn this guy's name, so please educate me if I am getting this wrong. Jan Min-hyuk. Let's go to our transfer guru, Matty Hayes. Matt, I think you've watched a couple of games of him so far since this kind of news was breaking. Firstly, Matt, have we got any closer to knowing if I pronounced that right or wrong in terms of his name?
No. No closer at all, and I will be absolutely no assistance whatsoever. It's Desiree Doué all over again when we spent a week pronouncing that wrong.
A week pronouncing that name for the guy to move on. You can't make it up, can you? You can't make it up.
Maybe he heard you attempt to pronounce it and thought he couldn't come here. So it's your fault, Ricky. But yeah, I've watched a few games in the last couple of hours since this news broke. The last 2 that Gwanghwamun played. They won 4-0 against Jeju United at the weekend, and they had a 1-1 draw with Daejeon Hana Citizen the week before. So some practicing of pronunciations going on here as well. He's an interesting player. I think there were 2 very different games that I watched, because against Jeju he scored twice, two very good goals. One, there was a well-worked corner routine that they worked to him at the edge of the box, and he curled one into the far corner from 25 yards. And the second, a long cross from the right-hand side coming over his shoulder that he passed into the bottom corner on the play. So 2 brilliant goals. The other against Daejeon Hana, he very, very not involved in the game. He struggled to get on the ball, and like George said, he played out on the left a lot. He played on the right a little bit as well. In terms of the style of player that he is, and again, I'd like to caveat this by saying I've only watched 2 games, so take it with a pinch of salt. But from what I can work out so far, he's I'd say similar in style to 𝐂𝐲 𝐂𝐬 in that, yes, on paper he's a winger, but he plays a lot more naturally in the kind of inverted positions, and he's really good variety with his movement. He's happy to drop deep and try to pick up the ball from the centre backs or the midfielders. He also likes to play on the inside shoulder of the full back, where he can make some well-timed runs to try and get in behind, with actually very decent passing range in the 𝐿𝐴𝐽 midfield. I suppose a couple of things that I've kind of noticed that definitely need work. And again, he's only 18 years of age. This is his first season in professional football, so I'm not criticising. Just for a player at his level, it's definitely an area where improvements can be made. Physically, he's not there at all. I've noticed a lot of times where he doesn't even bother going in for a header or bother going in for 50-50 duels, because I think he just knows he'll be shrugged off the ball quite easily. Pressing wise, 𝐿𝐴𝐽 press really, really effectively as a unit. It's actually really, really impressed me. But I think Yang, again, maybe because of his physicality, is reluctant to go into tackles, and at times he can be quite ineffective in that press. But I think if we're looking at natural raw ability and something that Ange Postecoglou can take and mold into his ideal player, which I think is exactly what's happening in this transfer window, Yang has very good dribbling ability, brilliant pace. He's really well able to beat a man. Like I said, he has that variety of movement. He had some good finishes, of course, in that game against Jeju, and 10 goal contributions in your first season as an 18-year-old. He's the youngest ever appearance maker for 𝐿𝐴𝐽. 35 seconds into his debut, he got an assist, and a minute into his second game, he got a goal. So he's a player who likes to get involved, and there's a lot of talent there, a lot of potential for the future. But I think just to kind of, get our expectations where they need to be, he's not near the level of Lucas Bergvall or Archie Gray for me just yet.
Right, okay. Matt, we appreciate that. George, you made a really interesting point there, actually. That one, I think we've said this before, Matt, on this show, definitely recently. And you said the point there, George, that Spurs have actually gone to the Asian market. And I think that's been one where we've been really surprised so far under Ange. And again, it's been a short period. When you look at it, it's been 12 months. It's had, a couple of windows. I think to date, we've been quite surprised that he hasn't looked at the Asian market. So I just wondered, do you think it's the first of quite a few that, George, you can see Spurs exploring the Asian market for? Or again, look, many out there, I mean, as you can see by a lot of the comments that are coming into the show, do feel like it's a almost marketing tool as well to get yet another Asian player in the Spurs camp itself, because again, of just how much adored Toney is. And again, when you look at the revenue that would generate for Spurs as a football club, you can't really go wrong. Do you have a view on that for you, George, in terms of the marketing aspect of another Korean player joining Tottenham?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the cynics sort of feeling like that. Maybe there's some element of that, because Sonny's obviously a Asian superstar, isn't he? He's one of the most iconic figures, in the world, but especially that part of the world. So if you can find someone else that's going to kind of help replace that when he does eventually move on, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess when you think of recent seasons, probably Mitoma's the one that sticks in everyone's mind.
Absolutely,
Brighton have managed to get him from absolutely nowhere, and he looks a really good player. I mean, he's only probably had two seasons in the Prem now, and he's obviously injured for a little bit last season, but he looks fantastic. So I guess it's hard to say whether this is going to be the start of many, because you don't envisage necessarily Spurs signing 5, 6, 7 players every season, and one of them being from Asia. But I guess if this guy does turn out to be very good, and as I sort of said before, I don't expect we'll see him near the first team until at least a year, maybe 2 years. But if this guy does good, then you've all of a sudden you've got Sonny, you've got him, you have a little bit of a pathway there. And I think it's just a bit of a surprise, really, that Spurs have had Son for, what is it now, 10 years? I think it was maybe 9 years.
9, yeah.
And this is the first time we've sort of dipped into that market. I think it's probably maybe a little bit down to the fact of the managers we've had. Probably certain managers wouldn't look at bringing in an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old from one of the Asian countries like Japan, Korea. But with Ange, you've got someone that's a lot more open to that, and is actually eager in sort of developing and moulding young players. So I think it'll work from that point of view. And hopefully this guy can be pretty decent.
Yeah, I agree on that point. Look, we understand from sources for Fabrizio Romano being one of them, the Spurs work to keep their move for the player under wraps whilst negotiations were still ongoing. Spurs scouts do believe the Korean forward has important potential, huge talent for the future. He is going to sign for Spurs. A medical is due to be scheduled very, very shortly. And then the plan will be for the player to remain with his club at present until January. But the documents are to be prepared in the next few days. As George mentioned, they're preparing to unveil the player, of course, on the tour that Spurs are doing, of course, in Japan and Korea. But again, the detail that you might want to know at the moment, 18 years old, 5'7", right winger, alternatively can play on the left-hand side, 24 appearances for his club at the moment, 7 goals, 3 assists, the youngest goal scorer in the history of the K-League 1, youngest goal scorer in the history of the club. He's currently at Gawang FC. And I think many will look at it again, it's a signing for the future. The likes like 𝐷𝐿, Sarr, Veliz, Phillips. And I think, you know what, just to finish up on this point, actually, Matt, I think George made that really good point there that, you know, when you look at what Spurs have done in terms of signing a young player for every window, is this that young player, Matt? Because again, they've signed Archie Gray. So I think that's why there's a lot of skepticism at the moment by the fact Spurs are tending to buy very, very young players. He's the third 18-year-old to be joining the club in a matter of months. Do you feel this is one, Matt, where again, it's not going to eat into any chunk of any transfer budget, given the fact from according to reports, Spurs are rumoured to be paying around €4 million for Yang, from what we're hearing?
Yeah, I don't think this will affect any of our existing plans for the window. I think we heard earlier this week that Tottenham were ready to pull the trigger on 3 deals. This could be one of them. You know, it's not to say, you know, it might change the numbers that we're going to sign because he counts as one of the numbers. But in terms of the overall budget, 4 million is a drop in the ocean for a side like Tottenham and the PSR freedom that we have at the moment as well. And I think we've heard window after window that Tottenham go into the transfer period with their set list of targets. But if other opportunities arise, they'll be willing to act on those throughout the window. And maybe this could just be one of those. But if it affects the overall squad building, I'd be very surprised. And I don't think Postecoglou would be happy either.
Yeah, again, it's interesting when you look at the guy as a player very quickly on this point. He has, and naturally, again, you could say this is more biased reviews. Again, the Korean media are suggesting that, you know, no one's had arguably a more sensational debut season than Yang. The 7 goals, the 3 assists in 24 games at the age of just 18. I think, it's even more impressive given the fact he's achieved all this while still attending his local school as a student. So again, he's playing football as well as obviously the education piece as well going in there. And K-League fans have tracked his progress for, again, a number of years. He is led to believe to be the next sensational young prospect out of Korea, which again, I know for some Spurs fans, that will drive them up the wall here. And again, look, another teenage prospect. When are we going to buy for now? I think the key thing on this, George, is that when we're looking to bring in what appears to be a explosive young dribbling ability of a winger that again is still in the early stages, as Matt said there, the key is that this won't affect the business Spurs need to do primarily this window when it comes to signing new fill. As we lost you there, George, a point around bringing players in that are going to effectively come into the first team and actually genuinely push the team on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important, and Matt mentioned this, that, you know, yes, Spurs are going to have signed 3 18-year-olds this summer, but 2 of those guys, Archie Gray 100% and Lucas Bergvall as well, from what we've seen in pre-season, those guys look ready to affect the first team. I mean, I've seen more of Archie Gray than I've Lucas, but I'm so excited that we've signed Archie Gray. I think maybe because it happened start of July, it doesn't feel like it's a real massive thing now because it's sort of 3-4 weeks on. But I think he's going to be so good, and people are going to very, very quickly realise what a brilliant move that is for Spurs. So yeah, this Wang's not going to affect the budget for this summer. And you know, Matt said it himself that Spurs will have a list of targets, and then outside of that, if an opportunity comes up, then they're going to go for it. And yeah, I mean, as we've sort of said, it feels like a little bit of a no-brainer, a no-lose situation. You know, if he doesn't come off and become the superstar that, by all accounts, he has the talent to be, then I'm sure Spurs could sell him for a decent fee. And that's kind of something that Spurs have got to get better at doing. I think part of this sort of philosophy with some of the young players again is almost going back in time a little bit to when Spurs did buy young and then they'd sell at a good age, and that's how you keep going. Obviously we have the stadium now, we don't need to do that as much, but it's a worthwhile tactic, and if you can get the odd Sarr, 𝐷𝐿, then it pays off handsomely. Yeah,
I do agree. Look, in terms of the player itself, I think we've pretty much covered all bases at the moment. I think anything more will be going to overdrive, given the fact Spurs are yet to actually get him signed on the dotted line. But again, must emphasise the fact that, again, young kid, one for the future. I think not for the now. And hopefully, like we've all just said here in this opening 20 minutes or so, it does not affect Tottenham's budget when it comes to what they need to do this summer. Because again, I think we all do agree that there are pressing areas in that first team that definitely need to be upgraded between now and the start of the season if Spurs are going to improve and, like I say, genuinely shorten that gap between themselves, Man City respectively, Arsenal, and again, you've got clubs in the background like Liverpool, who knows that they're going to have a transition season. Aston Villa are buying as well. Arsenal, we now are on the verge of signing Calafiori as well. So again, it even emphasises that fact again, Spurs will need to do business. So what we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. When we return, we'll be discussing the business Spurs need to do, what they've done so far, and what is to come. I'm joined by my co-host, the brilliant Matty Hayes over there. Matt, thank you so much. And we're joined by, returning to the show, he's battle technology to be with us tonight. We're wonderfully being joined by the Tottenham Hotspur correspondent for PA. George Sessions is back. Spurs fan, not afraid to tell you as well that he's Spurs. And he's got the pleasure sometimes of covering Spurs on a week-to-week basis. I will say sometimes, George, because it can be a tough gig, right? Is it fair to say that, George, at times?
Sitting in Conte's press conference at Southampton was a very, very interesting time. As a fan and as a journalist, I didn't know what to think.
I'll tell you what, I mean, you've overseen, I mean, some would say they're classic press conferences, George, but when you're there as a journalist, what is that like? I mean, what is that like as a journalist? When you're a Spurs fan and you're seeing some of these managers lose it, if I put it in the most politest way, what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, the Conte one was absolutely crazy. Just him shouting alibis at Dan Kilpatrick from the standards. That would be sort of I'll take that to the grave, that memory.
Did you know at that point, George? Did you know at that point it was done? Did you know he was never going to manage Spurs again?
Yeah. I mean, actually, he did. So basically, how it sort of works is he would go and speak to the radios first. So he'd spoken to BBC, either London or maybe Radio 5 Live, and we saw a couple of the quotes sort of coming through on Twitter. The sort of guy that was doing it for him and did the interview tweeted a few things, and we was like, whoa, is he gonna come in and be more mellow, or is he gonna carry on and just be wound off and just won't stop? And yeah, it was absolutely extraordinary. Very, very Spurs though, right? That's sort of what happens, doesn't it? We get a manager in and we push him, run him into the ground, then he goes bonkers. But yeah, that's old news, isn't it now? So we got big hands to get excited about.
Absolutely, go on, mate.
My favourite part about that press conference is I think Tottenham fans are all unanimous in saying, I agree with every word he said, but he's probably got to be sacked after that. It was just such a Spursy approach that he was right, but in the wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, what must be incredible, George, for you, I suppose, when you're in that room and there's a select few of you in there, especially like away to Saints, for example, because I presume you've obviously got a lot of the local journalists in there, but there's probably a few that are kind of, in and around Spurs every day. There's probably yourself, Ali likes in there, Dan Kilpatrick. You've got 4 or 5 of you. When you've got those quotes that are yet to be aired on X or on any social platform, when you think, when this goes out there, this is going to go absolutely mental. That must be really weird because you always get that information before any of us fans do. Does that make sense in a bizarre way?
Yeah, no, it is. It was a curious kind of, I guess, it was kind of like 5-10 minutes where he walked out and everyone just looked at each other like, did that really happen? Did he just ask to be sacked, essentially? Sort of got his P45 and put it on a table. And then actually I was driving from Southampton home that night with Alistair Gold, and we were both like, are Spurs going to sack him tonight? Do we sort of, we have to pull over on the M3 and start typing that Spurs have sacked Antonio Conte? It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it just shows you, like, for those out there, that with journalists, it's non-stop as well. Like I say, for you guys, it's relentless, right? I mean, again, the times that you've been called into, again, crazy moments as press conference and what's gone on at Spurs. We've not even touched upon Nuno yet, and hopefully we won't touch upon Nuno, because, again, that was a crazy time for the club, and you being there as well around that period. You must be thinking, George, does it put you off supporting Spurs when you're having to cover them as a club? You think, this can't be happening all at one club. Surely all this.
It makes it hard to defend them, doesn't it? When I'm like, oh no, it's great being a Spurs fan. I've got a 3-year-old and I'm desperate for him to be a Spurs fan. But I do have to, I mean, sort of Leyton Orient's my kind of second club, and Leyton Orient won something the other year, and I'm like, well, maybe I'd be better off pushing him in that direction. You might see us win something. So, but no, it'll make it worth it, won't it? When we win something, when we're back in the, we can all sing. We'll actually won a trophy. It'll be worth it. We'll remember those times.
I bet you their elite shirts are 130 quid to buy. Leyton Orient, I might be wrong. I bet they're a bit cheaper, aren't they?
A bit cheaper, not by much though. Jesus, God, crazy, yeah.
Right, listen, it's been a pleasure. Let's head over to Matt, the kickstart where we are at the moment in this transfer window. We know, like I say, Spurs closing in on Yang. Matty, tell us, we'll hand over to you to kick us off on this transfer window.
Yeah, George, you mentioned already that the Premier League season seems to be coming at us thick and fast, and we're only 4 weeks away from the first game of the new campaign. Tottenham travelling, of course, to Leicester on Monday, the 19th of August. 𝐼𝐸 Gray, Lucas Bergvall, and Timo Werner, the 3 deals we've got in over the line already. Look to be signing Yang, but there's no doubt that Tottenham have a lot more to do in terms of incomings for the window ahead. In terms of outgoings, again, a number of players that we still need to move on, but the most recent was Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, who joined Marseille ahead of the new season earlier this week. He moves there on loan with an obligation to buy that could eventually be worth up to €20 million or £16.8 million for Tottenham. What have you made of the business that Tottenham have done already this summer, and are you surprised that more hasn't been done in terms of incomings?
No, I don't think I am, purely on the basis that we've had a busy international summer. So we've had the Copa America and the Euros, and I think when that happens, it does just delay transfers. You've got guys that are playing there, or when they finish, they're on holiday. So I'm not hugely surprised, and as I sort of said at the top, very pleased with the players that have come in. I think it's been a good window. It's not been a great window yet. We clearly, Spurs want to sign more players, but a real key aspect of this window has actually been getting people out the door. I mean, I think back at the last season before last, how big the number of loan players Spurs had out on loan. I mean, so many that actually Matt Doherty had to get released because they had so many out on loan, which is a crazy situation. And to think that kind of, people like Troy Parrott and Joe Rodon, Japhet Tanganga, Ryan Sessegnon, all those guys have now left. And, it's unfortunate for a lot of them because we'd want to see those guys do well. But there needs to be an aspect of ruthlessness because the squad has been too big, and that stops people coming in. You can't just sign unlimited players and be left with a 40-man squad. And I guess another big one is Tanguy Ndombele. We was all set for another summer of could Tanguy do it? And very quickly Spurs cut that. And I think that's a really good deal because I think, sure, he probably would have gone out on loan somewhere, but if Spurs have been paying his wages, it's about 10 million a year for his wages, so they've cut that straight away. So I've been very pleased with that aspect of it, getting rid of those guys, and there's a few more that need to be shipped out. And then, as I sort of touched upon, 𝐼𝐸 Gray, honestly, I'm so excited that we've got him. And I'm just intrigued now to see where he's going to be playing early, and he's clearly probably not going to be taking Basuma's place as the sort of number 6, or most likely not going to be taking Maddison or Sarr's place as the number 8. But I do really think, depending on what sort of movement we have over the next couple of weeks, that he could sort of be the backup right back, because he played most of his football last season at right back for Leeds, and he was sort of naturally inverting for them. So you just think, what if he's doing that for Leeds? What's Ange going to be able to do with him when he actually gets to grips with him? And clearly there's going to be people that say he's only had one season in the Championship. But what probably people either don't know or sort of forget is he was on the bench for Leeds when they were in the Premier League against Arsenal at 15 years old. Which was December 21 off the top of my head. And Bielsa basically got sacked a couple of months later. I'm very, very confident if Bielsa had stayed there, 𝐼𝐸 Gray probably would have played as a 16-year-old in the Premier League. Wow. And then you think, if we sign a 16-year-old that's already played in the Premier League, same as we're talking about with Marky Moore, then everyone's going crazy. So honestly, I think Spurs have got a real, I think it's been mentioned, but I think he is a sort of a generational talent if he's going to carry on in that trajectory. And hopefully he doesn't go down the Jack Clark route, and he's more of an Aaron Lennon, son, a teenager from Leeds that goes on to play 300 plus games for us. So I'm very excited by him. And look, Timo Werner's going to be one that people are probably going to use to beat the board with. And I understand that to an extent, because you don't want to sign a loan player that's not got the best stats. But I think the real key aspect with him, and also why I think Brennan Johnson's going to have a brilliant year, is because whilst Timo Werner's not fantastic in front of goal, he really does understand what Ange wants from his wide forwards. If you look at sort of, when he was fit, that sort of movement going on the outside and swinging the ball across, and the other winger being there at the back post to tap in, that's an Ange goal. It's an Ange ball goal. Yeah. And Timo Werner did get that very quickly and a lot more than other people. And of course, there's numerous occasions where he's gone through and goal and he's missed. But he really does understand what you want as a forward. And as long as he's going to be Spurs' backup option on the left, then I think getting him in on loan, and I think the sort of option to buy is only around sort of 7 or 8 million. It's it's sort of a no-brainer, especially with us in the Europa League where we are going to need those players. So I think that's a fine deal. And Lucas Bergvall, I don't know a huge amount about, but in pre-season he's been very impressive, and it looks like he's going to be a real part of the first team and be pushing to get minutes in the cup competitions and then eventually in the Premier League. So it's three decent players were brought in. Obviously Timo sort of not as exciting, but Archie Gray I'm massively excited about, and Lucas Bergvall looks very good. And importantly, we've cleared some wages, so a few more to go, but in that aspect. But yeah, it's been a good window so far, and 2 or 3 more signings, and I think it'll be a very, very good window.
I think, George, you mentioned that point there. I think that's why, again, there's some expectancy about Spurs, because they have really cleared a lot up in terms of wages, haven't they? When you look at the fact Højbjerg's now departed as well, what they're saving on him, Lloris should go back as well, Dyer, Kane. Although we know Werner's got that's a bit of a chunk of a wage there, and bringing Timo Werner back to the football club on another loan. One thing you picked up on there, George, and I want to ask Matt this question actually before I come back to you, George, is that, Matt, when you've seen Spurs in pre-season, it's only because, again, George has put something in my head there, and not that George said this, but this is what I've been feeling, that we look like we're trying to score just this one type of goal. It's almost like an L-shaped goal. Get to the byline, Johnson puts it across, Werner puts it across there for a tap-in. Are we worried, Matt, this is becoming a bit of a customary FIFA tactic? And forgive me, I haven't played FIFA for years after having 2 kids under 4. But do we need some more variation in terms of goals and the way they're coming about, Matt?
I think that variation is coming. I think with the way Maddison and 𝐀𝐬𝐧𝐭 have played in pre-season, with the two of them a lot more central, and I think I spoke about this a little bit on the last show, that we do seem to be diversifying or attacking patterns like that, and there's a lot more coming through the centre of the pitch, and with the ball progression abilities that Lucas Bergvall and Archie Gray have added to the 𝐅𝐸 Bissoumas and Rodrigo Bentancur of the squad as well. I think we are trying to diversify that, and it makes us unpredictable. Towards the end of last season, our results dipped, not only because of the standard of teams that we were playing, but it's because everyone knew what we were doing. And when you try the same thing over and over again and it doesn't work out, the mentality of the player is going to drop, and it snowballs from there. And Postecoglou was very keen to speak about how we wanted the players to see that they didn't stand still over the summer break, and there were new ideas coming. And I do think a lot of that is based around how we get the ball into the box to Son or Richarlison or Johnson, whoever it is, and into the back of the net. And I think we have seen some new ideas in pre-season, and it may take a while to perfect those. We're probably not going to score 4 goals in that way against Leicester, but as the season goes on and as the new players start to get embedded into that squad, I'm sure we will see a little bit more. And as we always hear, second season under Postecoglou is always the most exciting one. So hopefully that bears true with what's coming.
Fingers crossed. On the point of being the second season, George, to come back round to you, and just made no secret the fact that he does want new signings on top of what's already come in. On the need of further recruits, he was asked actually at the weekend about that, and he said, "Look, I'm comfortable." Or forgive me, I think this might have been after Spurs' first preseason game against Hearts. He said, "We've got a strategy in place about what we want to do. I'm really happy with the lads we've brought in. Both obviously very talented, but more importantly, really ambitious. They're here not to ease their way in. They want to play, and I think that's great. They brought energy to the group, and there's no doubt there'll be a couple of more additions coming in. And by a couple, we're presuming that Postecoglou is using that term loosely, as in that could be 2, 3 or more. Who knows? I mean, there's been recent reports, again, friend of the show, Paul O'Keefe, suggesting Spurs do want to get 3 players over the line. Obviously, we're not too privy if that is 2 plus Yang, or if Yang is included in that list as well. But I think what's fairly clear is that from the outside looking in, George, that Spurs definitely need more bodies. You could say particularly an attacking player or 2, another midfielder, maybe another centre-back with a full-back, also a strong possibility. I mean, you've got a gut feeling, George, outside of Yang, where do you feel Spurs need to turn to next? They've got this pressing situation around needing a centre-forward. There's an argument to say that they need some real, again, decency in that midfield in terms of many have been crying out for a number 6. Where do you stand in terms of what, George, Spurs needs to do next in your mind, positional-wise?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tricky one in the sense that it's a little bit dictated by who goes out, I feel like. I mean, clearly Spurs need a forward. There's no secret about that. Whether it's going to be a centre forward or whether it's going to be someone that's going to be playing out wide, I'd say probably on the left, depending if Richarlison goes. But yeah, I feel like where Spurs are going to spend money this summer and where the big sign is going to be that everyone will be getting excited about will be either a forward out wide or a centre forward. Away from that, I guess, there's been sort of, no secret. I think the Spurs probably need a centre back. they almost need, a player that is versatile enough to be across, that can maybe play left or right back. But as I say, it kind of depends on who's there. I sort of look at our defence at the minute with obviously Dragusin, Van de Ven and Romero. If you sort of chuck Ben Davies in there, that's 4 centre-backs. You've also got Ash Phillips, but I think it'd be better for him to go out on loan. I think Spurs will feel for his development. It's better for him to have another whole year of playing. Do Spurs need more than 4 centre-backs? I guess if you haven't got any cover at left back, then Ben Davies has to be the left back cover. So then you need to bring someone in. But I think centre forward is the area where they're gonna go big. Unfortunately, I feel like with Ivan Toney, I can just see it now. August 30th, 10 o'clock. We've got an hour to go to a deadline day. Spurs have agreed a fee.
Oh, you really think George should push? They wait that long? Is that because Brentford, that asking price? You think Spurs would wait out that long for a striker?
I could see it with him. Yeah, I do. I'm sort of caught in two minds between whether Spurs will sign 𝐅𝐸g 𝐂𝐨𝐬, someone that I watched a lot of Crystal Palace, who's brilliant, or if they'll sign Ivan Toney. I don't personally think they're going to sign both.
You think it'll be either or? You don't think that?
I think so.
Right.
It might be dependent on Richarlison. If Richarlison does get sold, then clearly they then can go for both. But I do think that Ivan Toney, there's certain things with Ange. He looks for players. He looks for certain things in players. He looks for their journey. How difficult has it been to get to the top? And do they have something to prove? You go for all the signings he's made at Spurs, I'm talking about. But even you can go further back. But you look at the players he signed at Spurs, Vicario, Van de Ven, plenty of other guys. I mean, even Maddison sort of come here with points to prove, just got relegated. And you look at Toney, and I just think he's had obviously clearly a difficult year. His journey to the top has been far from straightforward. But he's such a good player, and I've watched him a fair bit during that first season when he came up with Brentford, and his record for them is, I know people look and think of last season, and I think he only scored 4 times for him, but his record overall for them is really impressive. I think he sort of averages, I think he's played about 80 games in the Premier League. Yeah, he's got 30 goals. Sort of
one in 3, right? 1 in 3.
Basically, goal and assist is basically averages a goal and assist every 2 games, and this is for Brentford. Remember, this isn't for a top 8 club. And his link up plays is excellent, and I think there's definitely a feeling at Brentford that this is the right time for him to go this summer. He's only got a year left. They've just signed his replacement, essentially, 𝐅𝐸g 𝐂𝐸𝐬, for 30 million, so that's a decent fee for him. I'm not sure it's quite accurate that they sort of need to sell, because they just got the David Raya money this summer. So I think that essentially pays for 𝐅𝐸g 𝐂𝐸𝐬. But clearly with Ivan Toney having 12 months left and being the sort of figure he is at that club, and how big his stature is, especially after a decent Euros for England, I think they recognise that now is the time to sell. And it does feel like at the minute it's sort of between Tottenham and West Ham, I think, for his signature. And I think Spurs are not sort of saying loads when it comes to Ivan Toney, but I think Ange does like him and does respect him. So I feel like that's the one to keep an eye on. But as I say, I don't feel like it's going to happen that quickly. Personally, he's not due back, I think, at Brentford until first week of August. So he's got a bit of time off now.
And you wouldn't imagine on that basis, Jules, like you say there, do you think that's again a part of the reason why we're not seeing many moves being made on a prominent level with players coming in that are generally going to affect the first team, because these players are now away on respective holidays because of Euro involvement, Copa America involvement, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Conor Gallagher's kind of another one. I'm not 100% sure if that will happen, but he's another one that's been away in national tournament. He's not going to be back at Chelsea until August. So those kind of, he's away now. People just leave him be, give him a break. So that's why I just think, especially with Toney, and I guess 𝐂𝐸 is the exact same boat. But yeah, with the Toney one, it just feels like that's the one to watch. His name's been linked with Spurs for a good 12 to 18 months now. I feel like Spurs might have looked at him actually when he was at Peterborough and he went to Brentford. Probably one of those that David Pleat scouted, because David Pleat scouts everyone in the EFL.
Incredible, that guy, isn't it? Incredible, that guy.
Yeah. I mean,
knowledge is unbelievable.
Madison, I think 𝐂𝐸 was one of his as well. He looked at 𝐂𝐸, wanted Spurs to sign 𝐂𝐸 when he was at QPR. So yeah, I feel like Ivan Toney's the one to keep an eye on, because Brentford expect him to go this summer. It's not guaranteed, but they expect him to go. I think it's right for the club. I think it's right for Ivan Toney and Chelsea, Arsenal, and maybe Man United's one to keep an eye on that situation. But they've just signed a forward as well, so it just feels like Ivan Toney could be the one to keep an eye on with Spurs.
What's interesting, Matt, on Ivan Toney? It feels like when we mentioned this on our show, at the start of the summer, Matt, or even before that, I mean, even in the last 12 months, it feels like this is now one that is becoming more slowly accepting by Spurs fans the closer we get to the end of the window, if that makes sense. It's almost like we're getting to a point where we think, okay, yeah, we're accepting, but is he the right fit, Matt? I mean, again, I think I've asked you this before, Matt. We've had interviews out there that, again, he seems to have been quite honest in terms of maybe where he would like to go. I think there were links to Arsenal where he made an admission to that on previous interviews. I mean, have we just got to get over that, Matt, if that does come to fruition and Spurs do sign him? Because, again, people won't like to say this, but there's players in Spurs' squad that are also probably Arsenal fans. As we know, Kulusevski's got a picture outside the Emirates with the Henry statue. So is it a case that, Matt, if he comes in and scores goals, this gets forgotten, doesn't it? I mean, it's about what works best for Tottenham.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should really care about the Arsenal factor. I mean, we know Harry Kane's past, and we still idolise him as we should. I think the biggest concern is, like you said, the interviews and his conduct off the pitch at times, and we know that's a very big factor for Ange Postecoglou, and he's spoken so eloquently in the past about how one bad apple can taint the whole dressing room. And for me, that would be a concern if we did go for Ivan Toney. I mean, when he was out for 8 months being banned for betting on football matches and his club were supporting him at every turn, he went on the diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett and said he can't wait to leave. So there are definitely concerns there. But what I would say is if that's something that Ange Postecoglou is willing to overlook, well, then I think I have to as well. And maybe that goes for the majority of the fan base as well, because there's no questioning what he can do on the pitch. He's a clinical striker. George rattled off the numbers there. He gets goals in a team that maybe shouldn't have as many as they did. And last season, when he was missing up until January and struggling to get back to his best in the latter stage of the season, they were looking over their shoulder towards relegation, which isn't a concern they've had in their time in the Premier League so far. So yeah, definitely a very, very different player on and off the pitch. But again, if Postecoglou is happy to go that route and thinks he can be a good addition to the squad, regardless of maybe what he said, well, then I think we should be happy with that.
Yeah, I think a big thing to sort of say with his character, and I think it's understandable, because if you see a guy that's sort of facing a ban, he comes out and says he wants to move, people are going to question it. But I guess a big thing to consider is how much Gareth Southgate threw his weight behind him. Could have easily wiped his hands of him when the ban happened, stuck up for him straight away, and to actually take him to the Euros was quite a big thing, because his form wasn't very good. But we all saw that it sort of kind of went off the boil a little bit after a strong start, so that he easily had an excuse not to take him. But the fact he did take him and put his neck on the line to take him, and it paid off, because Ivan Toney had a big impact in 2 knockout games, obviously one with a penalty and the other one setting up Kane for the winner. I think that's kind of a big tick. So when fans are thinking, this guy's got a bad character, sort of thing, well, actually, if Gareth Southgate's backed him and Southgate doesn't, you can criticise Southgate for certain things, but you can't question his kind of, the sort of integrity he asked for from his players. So I think that's a big tick when it comes to Ivan Toney's kind of character. And also, I think Spurs, I guess you could say Ivan kind of fits into the Jude Bellingham, Michael Jordan mould, where they've got this extreme self-confidence, and some people will call it arrogance, but I think there's definitely been a case at Spurs where that's been lacking, and Spurs clearly are trying to sign more players. Maddison instantly comes to mind that have got that self-confidence, and Ange said it at some point during the season. I think it was kind of March, April time. He was asked about, do you want to sign players that want Champions League football? And he said, no, I want to sign players that know that they're coming to a club that hasn't won for a while, and this is a challenge. You've got to embrace that challenge. And Ivan Toney would. I think he's the sort of player that would embrace that challenge of changing the history of a club. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's one to keep an eye on. I mean, many are also suggesting the fact, again, can't make it up. Spurs go and land themselves a new betting sponsor, and then you got Ivan Toney fronting it. There's certain things about Spurs where just certain things align the starlight. So you think, how has that happened? But we shall see. Like I say, we shall see. It's 1, like I say, George is there. 2, keep an eye on. I'm going to hand back to Matt because, again, we've got the pleasure of having George here who's watched and seen Ange in those press conferences each and every week. So it's only fair we get the take of what he's made of that first season. So I'll hand back to you, Matty, on that point.
Yeah, we want to get your take on last season, George, and Ange's first season at the club. Started off in typical Spurs fashion, losing our record goal scorer on the eve of the new season as Harry Kane moved to Bayern Munich. And after a phenomenal opening 10 games, Ange had to go on to battle an ever-growing injury list, suspension list, and not to mention the international absences, with a number of players taking part in the African Cup of Nations and Asian Cup in January. Yet, we still ended up in 5th in the first year of Postecoglou's tenure, which definitely brought with it some highs and lows. How would you reflect on last season now, looking back, and what in your mind would be progression next season under Postecoglou's tenure?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a very, very good season, to be honest. When you think the year before finished 8th, had 3 managers in 3 months to end the season. A day before the season starts, you sell Harry Kane 30 goals. I never thought that Tottenham would realistically be in a relegation battle or close to a relegation battle. But when you look at those sort of cold hard facts, you're taking away 30 goals from a team that finished 8th. Who knew what was going to happen? And I think that's one of the big things that Postecoglou deserves huge credit for, the fact that he come in and hit the ground running and turned our stadium, which when our stadium is rocking is a brilliant stadium. But unfortunately for the last 3-4 years, you can probably count on your hand how many times it's been rocking like that. And to have those sort of, golden August, September, October months was brilliant. And I think that was really important because the fan base was a little bit disillusioned, wasn't it? There was protests against the board. Everyone was, I remember the Bournemouth game, it was crazy finish, and you just kind of, people were losing interest in Spurs when they were losing their love and affection for a club because it didn't feel like your club anymore. And when Ange come in, he instantly got everyone on board and took everyone on a journey. And sure, there was lows, you can't hide that. Obviously, the Chelsea game was a bit of a killer blow, from all aspects, in terms of the injuries, in terms of the momentum. And the second half of the season was clearly more difficult, but in a weird way, I look at the end of the season and I actually think now of that Man City game, and clearly the Man City game had a crazy narrative with Spurs winning. It would have helped Arsenal, and Ange obviously wasn't happy with the fans. Fans probably weren't happy with kind of some of the comments Ange made, but I actually think, if things go well under Ange over the next couple of years, people will look back at the Man City game as a real key point, because what sort of gets forgotten is actually he showed flexibility with his tactics and the style of play, because that was the big sort of elephant in the room during January, February, March. We can't keep playing this way. We've got to be a bit more pragmatic. And I think what people kind of forget, because you look at Liverpool and you look at Arteta, is year one that they wouldn't change. Year one it would have been heavy metal football from Klopp. Year one Arteta wouldn't have changed his principles at all, because you're nailing down those principles. You're getting the foundations in place. And when I look back at the Man City game, it's just slight tweaks from Ange, but Spurs look so much more solid with kind of almost a 3 at the back, really, with Dragusin, Van der Ven and Romero, and then Porro kind of pushing on as the lone fullback going forward, and Pape Sarr as a false 9, your Johnson and Son out very, very wide. It just slight tweaks in that game which give me a lot of confidence going into this season, that I think we're going to see a lot more adjustments. Well, maybe not adjustments, maybe that's a bit too strong word. I think we'll see a lot more tweaks from Ange this season to acknowledge the opposition. It's not going to change the principles of Spurs. Spurs are going to still play with a high line. There's still going to be those kind of patterns of play which you see with an Ange Ball team, and it is going to be Ange Ball. But I just think we're going to see a lot more of a balanced team this season, and that excites me, because I think that's what fans needed, to just see a glimpse of Ange showing some sort of flexibility, and he did in that game. And really and truly, Spurs should have got a point from that game. They had more possession than City, created some decent chances, and obviously if Son had scored it'd be a very different story now. It would be a painful story, clearly, but I do think that could be a really important game, because it shows what Spurs can do next season against the sort of big clubs, the top 6, so to speak, when things are tweaked slightly.
Got to ask you, George, only because you brought it up there. What was it like, George, being in those pressers, or that specific one, before Arsenal and after Arsenal? Because again, I mean, there was that, like you said there, that was a difficult week, I think, to compute as a Spurs fan. I mean, I think I spoke again. Me and Matty were doing shows around that point. We were speaking again on, I think, over the phone, and I think there was real confliction for some fans about what they wanted that week. And again, I think it was really weird that when you're a fan in that ground, natural emotion takes over where you can't help but want to cheer your team on. But then you realise what you're cheering and almost horrifyingly what the consequences could be if you want that. And I've got to be able to say that I fully agreed with Andy's points about wanting to win. I want that from the manager. I've got no problem about the manager wanting to win. But I did feel there was almost like a kind of misreading of just how much the fans maybe not didn't want the team to win, but that feeling of what it would cause had Spurs have won that game. What was your take on that around that point? Because again, there must have been really interesting press conferences to be in around, especially the first one. He was very dismissive about the fans really even thinking about not wanting to win that game. And then again, the post-match where he said, look, do you know what? I think on the Friday he came and said, I got it wrong. What was that like?
Yeah, I was going to mention that he did admit himself that he got it wrong, which is a nice trait for a manager to have, because so many of them are so stubborn that they won't admit that. But yeah, he misread the situation. He couldn't kind of grasp the fact that any Tottenham fan would not want their team to win, even if it did help Arsenal. Who cares? And I think there's a few things from that point of view. I think what he kind of did consistently say throughout that week was that we shouldn't care about Arsenal. We need to stop worrying about Arsenal, and I do think there's a lot of truth in that. I think myself, all Spurs fans are very guilty of looking at what Arsenal have done. Oh God, we've won, but they've won again. They've gone top of the league, and I think moving forward over the next couple of years, that's going to have to be something that Spurs, as a fan base, have got to get better at. They've got to ignore what Arsenal are doing and focus on what we're doing. But yeah, it was a fascinating few days because Ange just did not think that it was a genuine thing. He thought that it was a social media thing, perhaps, that some fans on social media didn't want Spurs to win. And he said, I guess the key aspect is when he was in the ground, and he realised. And I don't think the atmosphere was too bad. The only thing I didn't like that night was when the Spurs fans saying, "Oh, you're watching Arsenal after City scored." I didn't like that aspect of it. But I think it was just a bit quieter, wasn't it? It wasn't as sort of raucous as it would be for a midweek game against City. But I think the sort of fear that he had very early on is that, oh, wait a second, if Man City win 3 or 4-0, Spurs fans will say, "Well done, Ange. What a great job you did. You let Man City win the league." And from a professional point of view, people will question him. Oh, did Ange throw that game? And that's the thing that filled him with dread. Hence why we saw such an animated Postecoglou on the sidelines, because he's normally very controlled, but clearly, he had that fear inside him, and that's kind of nice in a sense, because that's just a genuine reaction. Clearly, if anyone question your integrity in any job you do, you're gonna hate that, and that was just a human reaction, and he was honest with that. But yeah, I think he would have learned a lot from that week, and I'm really intrigued to see when that September 14th or September 15th Arsenal game comes around. I think I don't think he's going to turn around and say it's the most important game of the season, we need to win for the fans. But I think he will just maybe go a bit easy on the fact it's just another game. I think he'll recognise now that it's not just another game, and I think that's there's not a bad thing in that. But yeah, it was a crazy few days. It really was. I didn't ever think he was going to leave, but you did sort of wonder, oh God, if there's no repairing of the relationship, this could be a horrible sort of ending to what looks like a brilliant partnership. But no, I think important to say as well, it's an absolute once in a I don't know, lifetime generation thing. It's very, very unlikely to ever happen again. So, but yeah, it was a very strange day. But as I sort of said at the top, I do think that game will actually be important in the long run, because it offers a little bit of unpredictability about what Spurs can do against a Man City or Arsenal or Liverpool moving forward, and I think that helps.
I want to ask you, Matt, a hypothetical here. If Spurs did beat Man City, and Spurs did add Arsenal the title, what would the mood be, Matt, going into the second season under Ange for you this season?
I don't like your hypotheticals, Ricky. They're difficult. I think, look, naturally the feeling wouldn't be as good, because we'd be listening to those lot down the road go on and on about their title. And for me, there would be some not satisfaction, but it'd be a bit of a reprieve that they would have genuinely earned a title. It's not like every other team were awful that year and they just happened to be the least bad. It's that they were actually quite good, and maybe they deserved it. But no, 100%. But but it will be a much more difficult summer. I mean, I think if we finish fifth and they finish first, I think the mood will be much worse than if we finish third and no, what way we're working it out. I think basically them winning is going to make us feel a lot worse regardless of where we finish, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's just part and parcel of a rivalry in football. And on the Ange point, I know some people suggested that maybe he wouldn't have had the same approach if that had happened when he was in Celtic, because he knows the depth of that rivalry, and maybe it just took a little bit for him to actually learn that the rivalry we have with Arsenal is maybe not as intense, but it is a very, very extreme rivalry.
Yeah, before I do turn our attention to players, just one more for you, George. Again, I just find it fascinating. You're with Ange, obviously, in those press conferences. I want to ask you just quickly, George, around set pieces, because Spurs, as we know, conceded 14 last season. And although it appears that towards the end of the season, Spurs stopped conceding. If they improved, we hope defensively we'll see in terms of this next season. Although I have seen, again, that rear its head in terms of pre-season, but I don't think really we can hold the team to account when they're changing the 11 twice in 45 minutes. And again, you got a lot of different players in that have never worn the Spurs shirt before in terms of the youngsters. How surprised were you, George, around it felt like at one point the dismissal around set pieces, but again, I know many people have just pointed out the fact, but look, hold on, there were bigger things at play rather than just set pieces. I mean, what was your feeling around that, George, as a journalist? You was in the room. If you wasn't asking the question, you certainly were around colleagues asking that question around set pieces. And it felt at one point just how dismissive Ange was to say, this is a problem. I mean, I think for me at the time as a Spurs fan, what I wanted to hear is that, look, it is a problem and we're working on it, but we never really got that. What we got is that it's not the be-all and end-all at the moment. There's bigger things at play, which is probably true. I wonder how you kind of viewed that as a journalist sitting in that room with Ange at the time.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways I think about this. I did sort of expect him to come out and say, oh, yeah, it's an issue and we need to work on it, along with lots of other things. But where I kind of wonder if he was reluctant to do that is because when you admit something publicly that it's an issue, then obviously everyone knows it's an issue. All the other 19 Premier League teams knows it's an issue. And then maybe even more importantly, the squad then worry that it's an issue. You can almost, footballers are very much in their own bubble. You can almost get away if you have an air of confidence in something that it's not an issue, that actually they won't worry about it. But if you tell a footballer to worry about something, he's going to worry about it. So I think that was maybe part of it. But I certainly think Ange's kind of messaging then probably could have been a little bit better. Actually, you bring up the set pieces, and the reason why I think Spurs should sign Toney is not to do with set pieces, but actually one of the reasons why I think Spurs struggled so much with set pieces is because we lost so much hype last season. You lost Harry Kane, who actually obviously was a brilliant goal scorer, but he was always at the front post and he always headed the balls away. You lost Eric Dyer, who was very good in the air. You lost even Perisic, who was very good in the air. So when I kind of did think about who Spurs were going to sign this season, I did think that they would be targeting actually taller players. Obviously, 𝐅𝐨𝐵 is not a taller player, but I do think that actually, that's been a big issue, that Spurs have got quite a small starting 11 now. Because you even look at Christian Romero, you look at Mickey van der Ven. Mickey van der Ven's very tall, but he's not an animal in the air yet. I'm sure he will be, but he's not that sort of player yet. And Christian Romero is pretty good in the air, but he's not actually the tallest centre-back. So I feel like if Spurs do the next couple of signings, Spurs will be taller players, and I think that will make a difference, because you can honestly go through the whole starting 11 or what you think will be the starting 11, and there's not many players over 6 foot. And I personally thought that was more of an issue last season, rather than us needing a set piece coach. I think it was more that actually height wise we're getting dominated by a lot of teams. But if you go back to Ange's time at Celtic, can't remember exactly the figures off my head, but I think first season, 33%, I think, of the goals he conceded was set pieces. And then the second year, it went down to 15. So I think when he was speaking out about how it's not an issue, I think that's probably in the back of his head that he knows. I guess, again, like I mentioned with the tweaks, I imagine year one, it's so focused on the football, playing our football, playing our patterns of play. And I think year two is when you get him working a little bit more. He's not going to spend a whole week working on set pieces, but I think maybe that'll be spent on a little bit more next season than it would have been last year.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. What we are going to do, we are going to go for our next break of the show for our listeners on audio. There are over 5,500 of you that are watching us live. So look, thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last Word On Spurs. I'm joined by Matty Hayes. I'm joined by the brilliant dual sessions over at PA Media. George, an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show. Look, a reminder for those out there, because we don't get a chance to talk about trophies often on Last Word on Spurs, that we are back amongst the nominations for this season's Football Content Awards 2024. It is still open. You can still vote for Last Word on Spurs. Can you help us bring another trophy home? Can you help us do the double? Can you help us secure another trophy? You can nominate us by going to Last Word. Well, you can go to Last Word on Spurs. You need to put us into Last Word on Spurs. You can hit the QR code. Can I just say, firstly, for our watching audience, for our listeners on audio, you'll get the link in the episode descriptions. All you need to do is, like I say, go via the description link or the QR code. Go to Last Word on Spurs under Best Podcast in Premier League and give us your vote. Like I say, greatly appreciated for last season. Me and Matt had a lot of fun on those awards. We lost Crackers for about an hour in Liverpool. It's never a good thing when you lose Crackers for an hour in Anfield, because you don't know where he's got to. But we did find him eventually, as you guys know. We've got him back. So always fun. We're looking forward to doing that again. And like I say, it's your guys' support that make all this possible. So look, we can't thank you enough. We're going to return our attention to a lot of the names that have been banded around, I think, so far in this summer transfer window. And that gets me started really in terms of the point that at the moment, George, we know the Spurs squad has landed safely in Tokyo for the 2024 summer tour of Japan and Korea. Now, Ange has taken 31 players for that trip to Asia, and is a blend of youth and experience, of course, in that squad. Many may be surprised to see one player heavily feature so far in the preseason, that of Jed Spence. I think many were expecting the player to probably leave the football club and go to Genoa or elsewhere, but it does appear that he is being given a reprieve and an opportunity to maybe show he does have a future in a Spurs shirt. He's been, like I say, heavily involved in the pre-season so far. He's scored, grabbed an assist against Hearts, and when you look at obviously what he's contributed overall, he, I think, showed his real defensive attributes in that recent friendly against QPR. Yes, there have only been 45-minute cameos. There's, again, at the moment, that to only judge him on, but do you feel, George, that there's a reprieve here for Jed Spence? Does he still have a future in a Spurs shirt for you?
Well, I mean, it's a big call by Ange to take him on the tour, because not everyone has gone on that tour, have they? Brian Hill's been left at home, Sergio Reguilon, Jed Spence easily could have been in that kind of group of players. So clearly Ange has seen something in that he likes, and I guess a big thing with Ange, and we saw this last summer, is he does give everyone a clean slate. Last summer Tanguy and Ndombele got a clean slate. In the summer, Giovanni Lo Celso did as well. Tanguy got injured on the tour, and sort of went the way it did in the end for him, and Giovanni Lo Celso managed to grasp his opportunity, and he didn't get loads of starts, but he did become a key player during a strange short season, but lots of injuries. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to judge with Jed Spence, because I guess a lot of it probably depends on what's going to happen with Emerson. But like Emerson Royal is going to be sold, and it does kind of feel like we're edging towards that. The talks with AC Milan continue, and you imagine eventually they're going to bump up from that 10 million euros that they stumped up the couple of weeks back. So if Emerson does go, then all of a sudden you do kind of have a vacancy in the squad for somebody that can play on either side. Because I guess that's the key thing for Jed at the minute, that he has played at left back before as well, but clearly a right back. And I think the other thing with him, which you'll be counting is in his favour, is that he'll come under that, and Spurs don't have many, but he'll come under that kind of locally trained player when it comes to UEFA. And that's a real big issue for Spurs. They've just not got many either English or sort of academy players in the group. But I think Jed at the minute would be sort of on that eighth locally trained player group. So as things stand, I guess he's been thrown a lifeline at Spurs, and he's taken it. He's done well in these two games, and clearly he's putting in the work behind the scenes as well. And it's only very small things that you're seeing in social media, but there does seem a good camaraderie between him and the other players. And I imagine that maybe wasn't always the case when it was his sort of first season at the club under Antonio Conte, because when a guy signs and within a week you're being told that you're a club sign, it's gonna kill your confidence. And I mean, he's only played 30 minutes, hasn't he, for Spurs? And but clearly there's a talented player there. Yes, he only did it in the Championship with Nottingham Forest, but he did actually against Premier League clubs in their FA Cup run. So clearly there's a talented player there, and it would be really good to see him stick around and give him an opportunity. And I guess the big thing is is what's going to happen with Emerson. But if Emerson does get sold, then all of a sudden Jed is in a very good position to be Spurs' kind of backup right back / left back if called upon. And there's going to be a lot of cup games this year with the Europa League, and that been extended from 6 to 8 group games. So there will be minutes for him. He's not going to be the starting first choice player ahead of Pedro Porro, we all think. But if he's happy to bide his time and be patient and stay professional, then it'd be really good to see him given a chance. And I certainly did not expect this a month ago. I thought he would go either permanently to Genoa or back on loan. And it's always good to see a young English player kind of getting a second chance, and it seems at the minute to be taking it.
A lot of the academy players, George, will be hoping for a bit of game time in that expanded Europa League as well, and a number of them are part of that 31-man squad that's travelled to Asia. 16-year-old Mikey Moore scored his first goal for the first team against Hearts and has already made a few Premier League appearances last season. The likes of Jamie Donnelly, Tyrese Hall, Will Lancashire, George Abbott, Luca Gunter, among others, who will all be looking to get some game time in Asia and impress in training sessions. How confident are you that some of Spurs' younger stars will get game time in the coming season, with the club competing hopefully on 4 fronts?
Yeah, I mean, Mikey Moore's 16 years old. It's ridiculous what he's doing as a 16-year-old. And I guess the important thing with him is not everyone needs to kind of keep level, not get too excited with him. But clearly, if Ange is throwing him on against Man City, against Sheffield United on the final day, he doesn't just give away those kind of, not caps, but he doesn't give away appearances, for free. He was very strong sort of first half of the season about not just giving Ashley Phillips or Dorrington minutes just for the sake of it. So Mikey Moore's earned those minutes, and clearly he's going to stay around the first team this season. I mean, I think it's a different story for the other guys you've mentioned. Jamie Donnelly, there's a lot of interest in him, and I think he's done his sort of Spurs career no harm this summer, especially playing left back. And again, it kind of depends on outgoings, but I don't really see Jamie Donnelly sticking around the first team. I think what's most likely is he's going to be the player that gets the loan this season, like we've seen with Alfie Devine in the past season, and Ash Phillips as well towards the end of last season. And the other guys you mentioned, I mean, Tyrese Hall's a really talented player. Like Jamie and like Mikey, that they've sort of been part of Stuart Lewis's under 17, under 18 group that won those 2 Premier League Cups, and they both jumped up and helped Wayne Bennett's under 21s win the Premier League 2 last season, which is no mean feat. So when you look at that, everyone laughs about Spurs not winning trophies, but actually the youth team have won 3 competitions in the last 2 seasons, and Mikey Moore's been central to that. Jamie Donnelly has, Tyrese Hall. So these are very exciting players, and you'd like to hope that they can follow in the footsteps of someone like Oliver Skipp and make it into the first team and stick there. I think the other guys you mentioned, Luca Gunter, he had a very good season last year. I'd again imagine he would most likely go back to the under 21s and be playing there. But George Abbott's sort of an interesting one, really. He's very young, but he captained the under 21s last season, and the key thing with him actually is his versatility. He's sort of playing right back, playing centre back, playing left back. I actually think he's a centre midfielder by trade, so he's really played everywhere for the under 21s, and he could be one of those that stays around, is part of the under 21s again, but actually the odd Europa League trip, he'll be part of it, just if there's injuries in certain positions and Spurs haven't got the numbers to sort of fill the bench. But yeah, I guess the main guy we're sort of looking at when it comes to the youth is Mikey Moore, and the feeling is that he's really the one. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to build him up too big, but it feels like he's going to be part of the first team, and I think he's going to be one that's going to be getting more minutes as the season progresses. I'm really intrigued to see kind of what his development is like in 12 months' time, because it's hard not to be excited when you've got a 16-year-old that's playing in the first team and not looking out of place. That's the key thing.
Yeah, it's on that point, George. I'm trying to think of my mind back. I mean, you probably have to go back Wayne Rooney, probably, in terms of that young to be. And just to be clear, I'm not suggesting and comparing him to Wayne Rooney. I'm saying that age to be given an opportunity in the Premier League that young. We'll see what comes of it, because again, you do feel that on the premise that he's going to sign that new long-term contract, there's going to have to be an element of guarantee around game time, right? Because I think there has been reports out there. You've had the likes of Borussia Dortmund sniffing around. We know how much Dortmund loves to give English youth players a chance. So I think, again, you've got to feel that he's going to have first team football. Otherwise, he won't commit his future to Tottenham. So I think it's an interesting time, doesn't it? It's an interesting time. Two players that look like won't be committing their future to Tottenham anytime soon and look like they're heading out of the door very, very soon is that of Bryan Gil and Sergio Reguilón. Now, interestingly, of course, both have not made the trip to Asia respectively, where we know Spurs' statement was to put exploring prospective transfer opportunities. And I think in the most politest way, they've been granted permission to leave the club to whoever they're going to look to be destined for. There's been to date very limited interest from what we're hearing, George, around Sergio Reguilón. We are hearing reports that Gil could be on his way to Girona as things stand at the moment. That seems to be the destination that he could be heading for. Do you think we'll get these two at the door very soon, George? I don't mean that in a brutal way, but do you think sooner rather than later they'll get the respective moves where that may be?
Yeah, they're the next two, aren't they? And I guess Giovanni Lo Celso would be in that bracket as well. The ones that have kind of been given a chance, but they're just not fitting with what Ange wants. And yeah, Bryan Gil, it sounds like that one's progressing, isn't it? With Girona, they just sold, I think it's Savio, isn't it, to Manchester City. So I think he would be coming in as kind of a replacement for him. And look, Bryan Gil's got a pretty decent record actually in the league. He's had a couple of loans there, hasn't he, since he joined Spurs and did fairly well. Certainly the one with Seville, I believe he did pretty well. So yeah, I'd imagine he would move on. It looks like, I've not been told this myself, but from what I was reading, actually, it seems like it's going to be a loan with an obligation to buy. That probably suits Spurs, doesn't it? And yeah, Sergio Reguilón is the one with Sergio Reguilón. I actually wonder will be his eventual destination is actually Man United, because Erik ten Hag did actually use him quite a lot last season when he joined, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but he come back in January, and then Luke Shaw got injured the following February. And I'm sure I was reading Erik ten Hag sort of bemoaning the fact that Man United had sent Sergio Reguilón back, and he was now at Brentford, and he was a real kind of key squad member. And you might have seen, but Man United have just not taken Tyrell Malacia on their US tour. He's kind of recovering from an injury. He didn't play at all last season. So I just wonder with Man United have done sort of some decent business so far this summer. They've spent a bit of money. They're looking to spend more on a centre back as well. But that just could be one that would maybe make sense for Ten Hag to get another body in to cover a left back, because if you've got Luke Shaw that's just had a very injury hit season, and Tyrell Malacia as well, that's not played at all last season, you could do with another body in that position. And Reguilón's not going to cost a lot. He's got a year left. It'd probably be a couple of million. And Ten Hag seemed to like what he did during the first half of last season. So I wonder if that will be the one for him. There's not been a lot of talk about Sergio Reguilón, and I know for a fact he's not going to be going back to Brentford. I think his wages are too high. So yeah, I think Man United could be a potential destination for him. And yeah, I mean, he needs to move on, because he's not going to get game time at Spurs, and we've seen he doesn't fit with what Ange wants either.
I want to get your thoughts on the midfield situation at the moment, George. Tottenham have reportedly are reportedly weighing up an improved bid for Jacob Ramsey after having an offer of £20 million plus Giovanni Lo Celso rejected. There's reportedly a growing feeling that Ramsey could be prized away from Aston Villa by a bid of up to 50 million. And of course, any move for Ramsey is likely to be contingent on Villa accepting Lo Celso as part of that deal. But with his history with Unai Emery at Villarreal, I think that wouldn't be a difficult one to convince them of. And I want to throw Conor Gallagher into that conversation as well, because it's a rumour that doesn't go away. And I know maybe Atletico Madrid have taken the lead in this race at the moment. But how do you see the future of these three players potentially shaping up for Tottenham?
Yeah, I mean, with Gio, clearly it's the time for him to move on. He's only got a year left. Spurs aren't going to get anywhere near what they paid for him, but him moving on sort of suits all parties. And yeah, Aston Villa does make a lot of sense, doesn't it? Especially because of the Unai Emery link and their past history together. It's very, very rare that you see player plus cash deals. So I don't really see that happening in terms of Lo Celso going to Villa and Jacob Ramsey coming the other way, all in one deal. Clearly Spurs like Jacob Ramsey, and there was talk about him in January. Although what kind of makes me wonder if it won't progress much further is that Unai Emery was very strong when talking about him sort of back in January, February time, saying how important he was. And I guess from his point of view, as a guy that's come through Villa's academy, are you gonna leave the prospect of playing Champions League football for your boyhood club to sign for a team in Spurs that maybe will be a guaranteed starter, but is not a sort of a nailed thing, is it? So I'm not as confident of that happening. But his name does keep getting mentioned with Spurs, and clearly there is interest there. And yeah, Conor Gallagher's a strange scenario, really, because it's just another one of those where Chelsea just are desperate to get rid of a player that their fans quite like. Atletico has been the new name mentioned. I believe Aston Villa were mentioned previously as well. And you never know, in a weird world, you could see Chelsea sell Conor Gallagher to Aston Villa, and then Aston Villa think, actually, we can now afford to sell Jacob Ramsey. But you've also got the situation where neither of those players probably want to leave. Jacob Ramsey probably doesn't want to leave Villa. Conor Gallagher clearly doesn't want to leave Chelsea. He's captained them for a large chunk of last season. But there's no doubt that Ange does really like Conor Gallagher. And I actually watched Conor Gallagher at Crystal Palace a couple of years ago, and I think a lot of people do have this perception of Conor Gallagher that he's just someone that runs around and isn't very, very skillful on the ball. But actually at Crystal Palace, he was, not short of phenomenal, to be honest. He probably should have been in the Premier League Team of the Year that season, because I think he contributed sort of 15 goal assists for Palace, and was absolutely brilliant as a box-to-box midfielder. And he really was scoring goals in that Palace team. Some brilliant goals as well. They made the FA Cup semi-final that season. So I know he has got the capabilities to be a number 8. And I think he would do a good job for Spurs. But I'm just not sure. I mean, maybe 40 million, I'd be tempted to buy him. But I think Chelsea were asking for 50 million last summer. And I don't think Spurs should be spending that on him. And midfield's just a strange... I mean, maybe if Spurs sell Lo Celso and then Bentancur moves on, which I guess is not out of the question, then maybe there's a space there for Spurs to sign a midfielder. But the midfield does feel very congested all of a sudden, especially when you've got Bergwijn in there and obviously now Archie Gray. So I sort of feel like more another centre-back would make more sense. And I think Trevor Chalobah could be one to keep an eye on when it comes to centre-back, because he's another Chelsea Academy graduate that they're trying to push out who's not super keen to leave. But yeah, he's very versatile, centre-back, right-back, left-back. He's got quite a few years left on his contract, but I think there's been interest from Spurs in him in the past. So that'd be one. Maybe at the minute, I'd say he's more likely to join Spurs than actually Conor Gallagher from Chelsea.
You're talking there, George, as if you could see a world in which Spurs and Chelsea do business. Do you believe that now because of the change in Chelsea's boardroom? Do you think that's genuinely a possibility in the future? I
think so, yeah, because Conor Gallagher was very close to joining Spurs last summer.
Really?
Yeah, deadline day, it was Fulham wanted to sign Højbjerg. Højbjerg didn't want to go. If Fulham had signed Højbjerg, I think Spurs would have completed that Conor Gallagher move. It was very, very close. A lot of things were agreed. Right. Obviously, it's deadline day, so things you can run out of time. But there was a lot of optimism that would happen. But Højbjerg said no to Fulham, so that sort of was the end of that. So I think doing business with Chelsea isn't as much of an issue as it clearly was before with Roman Abramovich, and Spurs are doing lots of business with clubs that have got profit and sustainability issues. Obviously, Nottingham Forest the season before last, and Everton before that with Richarlison. So I think there's sort of more of a willingness from both clubs to do a deal.
Yeah, again, it's fascinating stuff on that point, because what is evidently clear is Ange really likes Gallagher, because I think from what I've heard internally as well, when you're being linked with the same player for the last 2-3 windows since Ange has walked through the door, there's got to be a common theme there, right? I mean, why would you keep being linked with that player if he's not of interest to the manager? So I guess we'll see how the window plans out. I mean, I just feel, I know Macca, bless him, was saying on here that he feels sick of the fact you've got a boyhood Chelsea fan there putting on a Spurs shirt. But look, we brought it up earlier with Toney that at the end of the day, it is a job. And as long as he comes in and gives absolutely everything to Spurs, then not a problem at all. So look, we'll see how that does play out for sure. I think when we are looking now in terms of other players that could head out sticking on the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of outgoings, Oliver Skipp. It's interesting. Skippy, there's not been a huge amount of speculation around Skippy's future this summer. I mean, again, that's because we know that there's this situation around just how crucial he is from a homegrown perspective. But there are reportedly interest from the likes of Leicester in regards to the player himself. I mean, I think, again, there's been reports out there that Skipp wants to obviously have a lot more regular first-team football. Will that change this season with Spurs, of course, fighting on all four fronts, being in the Europa League? Will that give Skippy an opportunity? We'll see. I mean, George, what's your gut feeling? Because I know many seem to now have that direct comparison to someone like Harry Winks, for example, that Skipp isn't up to the grade, needs to go and maybe move to a club where he will get regular first-team football. Where are you on Skipp? Because, again, you've been here under the managers of Jose Mourinho, who was very much praiseful of Skipp, seeing him as the next leader and captain of Tottenham. I mean, are you surprised to date that he hasn't had more of an influence in Spurs' midfield? And again, Conte was a big fan of him as well. You have to say that. Conte and Mourinho, both big fans of the player, played him at times. Where do you think the future holds? Is it at Spurs for Oliver Skipp or elsewhere?
I certainly don't see him leaving this window. You mentioned that the sort of the club trained, locally trained issue. I mean, Spurs have only got Oliver Skipp, Brandon Austin, and Alfie Whiteman as their three club trained players now that Japhet Tanganga's gone, and Troy Parrott was also one as well. So that I think Skipp needs to be kept purely on that basis, because when it comes to registering your 25-man squad with UEFA, you actually need 4 club trained players to be able to list the 25. So if you get rid of Skipp, then you're only left with 2. So you could potentially only name it a 23-man squad. But I think there will be more minutes for Skipp this season, certainly with those cup competitions, because Spurs went out of the Carabao Cup round 1. They went out of the FA Cup 4th round, didn't they? So they only played 2 games. With Europe, Thursday to Sunday, Spurs are Ange's gonna have to rotate. And yeah, Skipp's he's gonna get minutes. I'm not necessarily sure he'll get minutes as a centre midfielder actually, because obviously Ange has used him towards the end of last season. We played him on the left, didn't he, a couple of times, left back, which I know that he had a difficult afternoon. Can't remember if it was against Liverpool or maybe it was Man City at the difficult afternoon. But I think that I think he's going to stay one more season, and then potentially then it will be the case where he follows Harry Winks. But I mean, what you got to say with Oliver Skipp is that he's been at Tottenham a long time. He's played a lot of games for Spurs. He's never let Spurs down. I know sort of homegrown players and academy products kind of just sort of naturally seem to be the one that everyone vents their frustration with. But I think it's a guy that loves Spurs. No one can really ever accuse him of not wanting to do well for Spurs. And maybe with Ange, it's kind of a case where it doesn't massively suit Ange's style of play. Maybe he would suit more of a Mourinho Conte type of football where it is, a lot about energy, not as much on the ball, because Oliver Skipp's got an unbelievable engine. And he's good on the ball actually, but maybe he's not of the level of a Maddison or a Kulusevski or a Bentancur when it comes to that. And I know there has been interest in the past from Crystal Palace, Nottingham Forest. I think Leicester have been talked about this summer, but I just don't think he'll leave. I guess one of the big reasons is obviously this club trained issue, but I think he'll be convinced that there's more minutes for him this season, and it is an exciting time. This is a guy that's grown up at Spurs, only ever played for Spurs. There probably is, clearly he's a professional and he's going to want more minutes, but there's probably is part of him that thinks this could be an exciting season to be a Tottenham player, and if I can contribute towards that. It could be one of the best things I do in my life. And we saw that with Harry Winks helping Spurs get to the Champions League final. So I think he'll stick around for another season.
One player that we spoke about as a potential incoming earlier is 𝐅𝐸gh𝐂𝐸 Eze, and Manchester City are reportedly considering a move for the player. And should City follow up that interest, I think Tottenham would be powerless in preventing Eze from wanting to join Guardiola's side. We've also seen reports that Spurs may need to sell players before they can advance, while Manchester City's move depends on the future of Kevin De Bruyne. As a reported key target for Spurs, with Tottenham not put off by the 25-year-old's release clause, which is set around £60 million, any club would need to be prepared to pay a considerable amount of that fee up front. And if Michael Olise's move to Bayern Munich is anything to go by, there could be a lot more complications in that release clause as well. George, how realistic do you think that signing could be for Spurs this summer?
I mean, Spurs clearly like him. I've liked him for a long time. And I think he would be really, really good for Spurs. I just I don't personally see it happening. I could definitely be wrong, but from a Crystal Palace point of view, they've just sold Michael 𝐁𝐸 to Bayern Munich, and Steve Parish, their chairman's a very smart guy. He's going to know the optics are not going to look great going into a new season with a manager that's still relatively new in Oliver Glasner, selling your two best attacking players. I was reading today that by all accounts, Jordan Ayew, another one of their key integral players, is also being sold, I believe. So I just don't think Palace will want to sell in this summer, having also sold 𝐁𝐸, because it's kind of, from their point of view, they've always had one player that's guaranteed to score the goals or to create the goals to keep them up. It was previously Zaha, then it was Eze, then it was 𝐁𝐸. And if they sell Eze now, who is that guy that's going to guarantee him the goals and assists to keep him up? So it's from that point of view that I do wonder if he might stay there another season. And I guess if Man City do come in and then they start bidding, they start meeting the release clause, then Palace might be in a situation where they have to sell. But then you would imagine that Spurs are not going to be able to spend 70, 80 million on Eze, even though he's a fantastic player. It's a lot of money to spend. And the only other thing with Eze, and I don't know the kind of intricacies of his release clause. I know it's not a straight fee.
As you don't just go through the front door and pay the 60 million. There's more.
I'm not 100% sure the ins and outs, but it sounds like it's one of those where you have to pay a certain amount up front,
right? Which
is very, very uncommon now with transfers. Spurs, Chelsea, Man City, Arsenal, everyone they buy a player for 50 million and they pay the 50 million over sort of 4 or 5 seasons. I think Palace would be asking for a lot of it up front.
Right.
Which sure clubs can do, but then that's going to affect your sort of profit and sustainability. So I wonder if, and I think they had something similar in 𝐁𝐸's contract, which I think is maybe what put off certain clubs this summer. So I just think with the Eze one, like I kind of said earlier, I feel like it's either him or Toney, and I'm sort of leaning more towards Ivan Toney being the guy that we sign. And I guess also Eze largely plays off the left.
Yep.
At the minute, you've got Son there as your starting player, and then you've got Timo Werner as your backup. Now, if Richarlison gets sold and Ivan Toney comes in per se, then maybe you look at Son and Ivan Toney as your two forwards, and then you would bring in Eze as a left forward. But I don't personally see Toney, Eze, Richarlison, and Son all being in kind of that same part of the field. So yeah, the Eze, I'm not as confident about that happening, but. With Spurs, you can never tell, but there's just a lot of things with that one that needs to fall into place, I think.
The release clause complications, I think, could be a stumbling block. And with 𝐁𝐸's, I don't think it's been fully, kind of released what those were, but there was reports that some of them were on top of the release clause. There was a fee to go to 𝐁𝐸 and his agent. There was a sell-on clause for Crystal Palace built into that. Very clever business from Crystal Palace, but certainly complications and potentially a put-off for a buying club.
I just can't get away from the fact, though, George, on that point, we mentioned about him, and you're right in terms of that release clause. We don't know the intricacies of it and how that will be triggered. But the only thing I would say is that, does it not help us at all, George, sway in our favour the fact that he's a base client and the fact Spurs have got a lot of those base clients now, Ange being one, Sarr being one, Porro being one, and there's obviously enough Son being one as well. When you look at that squad, that might give any Spurs any advantage, or the reality is if City come in with a ridiculous amount and do obviously, of course, trigger that, and again, the player, I presume for him, he'll want to be competing at the highest level. That is the battle Spurs are going to have, right? If City come into that equation, going to be tough, right, George, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, no, the base is a big factor, clearly. Spurs have got a lot of base clients, and Ange is part of base. It is just more, I look at it from the Crystal Palace side of things, knowing how kind of Steve Parish works from having covered Palace for a couple of seasons. I just think it's not going to be a good look for them to have let Zaha go last summer, to have then let 𝐁𝐸 go in July, and then you let Eze go in August. You're sort of ripping out the heart of their sort of attacking, trio and attacking hub. But you are also right with the Man City. Man City were after him last summer. They sort of absolutely dropped the ball signing. The guy's name escapes me. It was the Wolves midfielder, but they signed him ahead of Eze, and
a very, very bad move. And look, clearly Spurs have liked Eze. You know, I'm 99% sure David played that was one of his that he scouted Eze when he was back at QPR, and probably a bit like Jack Grealish and maybe even James Maddison. You know, when he was back at Norwich and Coventry, Spurs should have moved then. And you know, sometimes with Maddison, these moves do eventually happen. The sort of, you know, the pieces fall in place, but there's a few things I feel like that maybe need to go a certain way for Spurs to get Eze. But I've no doubt he would be brilliant for Spurs, and he would offer kind of the unpredictability, which I think is maybe lacking in our attack at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, we talk about obviously players and their situations about being complicated. I mean, you could argue that's similar of the case where we are with Richarlison. There is talk of Richie seeing a summer move to Saudi Arabia. Those signs show no real purpose in terms of going away as we edge close to the start of the new season. He's been linked with a move to the Saudi Pro League over the past year. The latest reports indicate that we are seeing 𝐼𝐸 monitoring the Spurs ahead of a potential transfer. Again, look, I think it's fair to say, not proven to be the greatest amount of value from that 60 million transfer obviously from Everton back in the summer of 2022. And I think Spurs have the opportunity to recoup all of the money they would do, given the fact the striker has only contributed 16 goals, 8 assists in 66 appearances. George, gut feeling on Richarlison. Do you expect him to be a Spurs player coming into this window? What's your take?
I think he wants to be a Spurs player, which is a key aspect, isn't it? I think if Spurs got a 60 million offer, I think they'd accept it. And maybe that would be enough for Richarlison to think, well, they've accepted it. Maybe it is time to move on. But, you know, it was it towards the end of May or early June? He sort of put out a statement, didn't he, on Twitter saying there's no way he's leaving England this season. He's going to be playing. And, you know, when he was fit last season, after he had his sort of sports hernia operation, he was actually, you know, very impressive. Sort of scored, you know, 12 goals in a very quick space of time, sort of from kind of, you know, November through to March, and then got injured again. It's just the injuries which have really affected him, and I think that's why there's a willingness from Spurs to let him go. But I do wonder if he may be one that does hang around, and it could be a case that Spurs bring in a forward, you know, maybe an Ivan Toney, and it's him and, you know, those are the two guys that are rotating for the Europa League or for the cup competitions. I just think from his point of view, is it a good look for? And this is a guy that, you know, believes he should be Brazil's number 9, and in fairness, he was at the 2022 World Cup. So when he's fit, he feels like he's going to be starting for Brazil. If he goes out to the Saudi League and it doesn't go well, is he going to lose out to someone like Gabriel Jesus, who's in England in the Premier League scoring goals? So I sort of feel like he'll stick around at Spurs for this season. And if again he has an inconsistent season in terms of starts or goals, next summer will be the time when he'll want to move on. But I just don't. All the noises you hear from his side is that he is very happy at Spurs. He wants to stay at Spurs. He feels kind of, you know, supported by Ange Postecoglou. So I think he's going to want to stay. And if a player doesn't want to go, as we kind of saw with Brian Hill in January, you know, everyone wanted Brian Hill out the door in January. Brighton wanted him, I think Feyenoord wanted him, but he didn't want to go. He was happy at Spurs. So it's hard to, unless you're Chelsea, it's hard to push someone out the door.
I agree on that one, I do. How do you, Matty?
The last question, last name we want to bring to you, George, is that of Pedro Neto. As reports said, the Tottenham are the most concrete suitor for the player at the moment. Wolves want a fee of £60 million plus to consider selling the player. However, Spurs see Neto being worth in the region of about 45 million. His injury record is a real cause for concern, having missed 108 games in total since making the move to Molineux from Lazio. Of course, there's little doubting his quality when he's fit and available, with the winger racking up 3 goals and 11 assists across 24 appearances in all competitions last season. How likely do you think it is that Spurs could stump up the money to Wolves for the player this summer?
Yeah, I just think it's his injury issues. You know, he missed 2 big chunks last year, didn't he, with hamstring injuries, and we've just seen with Richarlison. Unfortunately, Spurs spent 60 million on Richarlison, and you know you've not really got, you know, 2 full seasons out of him. He's a very good player, Pedro Neto, and you know he was brilliant for Wolves at Spurs in February, wasn't he? You know, ran sort of half the length of the pitch to set up their winning goal. But I think if you're looking at the sort of fee that Wolves want, and I understand why they want that fee because he's a very decent player, but I just don't don't see Spurs spending that on a guy that you can't bank on as being 100% fit. So yeah, and it feels like that one's there was a little bit of momentum with that back in kind of February, March time when he was on a good run, and then he got the injury again. And it's very much cooled, so I can't see that one happening at the moment.
Again, it'll be interesting what Spurs do in terms of the winner and how that plays out, because I think, Matt, at the moment there is don't know if you agree, Matt, a desperate craving for a centre forward. I think George has given us a lot of valid points tonight on Toney, because again, to have someone on that obviously has overseen a period of his time, and again, when you look at the fact as well, it's not all just down to the profile of the player. When I talk about the fact that's what happened off the pitch, on it, you can't disagree, is that Toney does score goals, and Spurs do need goal scorers, Matt. I think that's very clear, and again, that's why there is, I think, a frustration amongst some of the fan base that we haven't yet got in a proven striker. When you look at Richarlison's record and the inconsistencies there, we're going to address that, Matt, haven't we? It does feel fairly soon.
Yeah, for definite. I think it's been a growing trend in football maybe in the last 5 or so years, because the standard of striker that's out there has decreased. I mean, there's not as many strikers in European football that you can bank on to get 25, 30 goals a season. So I think there's been a trend in kind of diversifying the goal scoring ability throughout the team. Like, you'd have Son score 10 or 15, you'd have Richarlison score 10, Maddison might get 5, Johnson might get 5, and even last year our centre backs were chipping in with quite a few towards the end of the season. But now in the Premier League, when Haaland is the way he is, when Bruno Fernandes is doing it for United, and Salah, not as much last season, but still being that main guy for Liverpool, maybe we do need that to compete, and we need that type of player to be the difference between a 2-1 defeat to Wolves and maybe a 3-2 victory with someone taking a few more chances. So for definite, I think it was the right decision last season. I said it last summer that we needed to bring in a profile that was away from Harry Kane, because until we changed the style, whoever we brought in to replace Harry Kane, if it was a like-for-like replacement, it was factually going to be worse than what we had, because he wasn't going to be Harry Kane. So I think it was right for a year to kind of just switch things up a little bit and start adapting to our new style. But now that we are used to that, now we can get in that goal scorer and put him in the middle of the box and hope that the service is good enough.
Oh, man, totally agree. Look, I've got to say, it's been an absolute pleasure having George here. For his own benefit and for our own sakes, let's give George the final question that we love asking the journalists on this show. And George, the good news is, mate, by the time you're back on us, hopefully sooner, hopefully it'll be January this time and not such a long absence from this show, everyone will forget the answer you're about to give us, George, on this one. So I'll let Matt take the reins on this one, because I'm going to be over for a break now for 2 weeks. So it won't be me asking you the questions, it'll be Matty. I'll hand over to Matt to close this one.
I think you underestimate the grudges that are held by the audience sometimes. But George, a two-parter question here. I want to ask you, first of all, how many players you think Tottenham will sign permanently between now and the deadline at the end of the summer, and also where you can see Spurs finishing in the Premier League next season.
I can definitely see. I mean, if we're going to include Yang, then I think Spurs will make 3 signings, including Yang. I definitely think they'll make a forward. Bringing a forward, and I'm just a bit conflicted whether it would be a centre back or a centre midfielder. A centre back being someone that's versatile to play at the full back as well. So I think there'll definitely be 2 signings, 3 if we're including Yang. And I do probably come back to bite me, but I am sort of edging towards Ivan Toney being a real option. And where will Spurs finish? Every single year, I dream of Spurs winning the cup. Every single year, I sort of think, the FA Cup. And my birthday is April 22nd, so it's always around the FA Cup semi-final weekend. It was my 30th last year, and I said to my wife, "Don't book anything because I'll be at Wembley. I'll be covering Spurs."
Oh,
and
mate,
then we lost to someone.
City, wasn't it? City, obviously.
No.
You mean
it wasn't last year. It might have been Sheffield United. It was Sheffield United when Kane got arrested, and I said the only good news about this tonight is that my 30th could be on the 22nd now. I've already written on my phone Bilbao, May 25th maybe.
Love that.
I've already written in Bilbao. So no, I do genuinely think we're going to have a good European run. And I think, in actual fact, with the Premier League, as much as it pains me to say, I feel like Arsenal is strong, Man City is strong, but a lot of other clubs are in transition. I think Man United, it's hard to know what Man United will do. They might all of a sudden kick on now they've got a bit of stability, but I certainly think Liverpool and Chelsea, Newcastle, Aston Villa will struggle with Champions League football. you'll probably see it. West Ham may do something, but I could see us being fourth. Potentially, could see us being third if we can get a couple of good signings during the next couple of weeks, and we can handle the Thursday to Sunday football, which I actually think in a way might suit Ange, because I don't think he likes to have loads of time in the training ground. I think how you build sort of his style of football is you get momentum, you win games, and Thursday to Sunday. Sorry, I think could suit Spurs. So I very optimistically will say we'll finish fourth and we'll win the Europa League. There we go.
I love that. That's fantastic. George, I've got to say, there's nearly over 6,500 that have been watching the show. Incredible, guys. Thank you so much for all your incredible support. Been an absolute pleasure to welcome George back in here after a long hiatus. George, where can everybody find you firstly? They're going to hear your dulcet tones, mate, I'm sure, on the opening, of course, of Ange's next presser to come, where you'll be there, seated and ready to go. Where can people find you, George, out there?
No, they probably don't want to find me, but yeah, I'm on Twitter. I don't call it X, I call it Twitter. At George Sessions on Twitter, and yeah, I managed to do all of Ange's pre-match pressers last season. I don't know if I'll be able to do that this year with all the extra ones chucked in, but yeah, I'll be there asking him questions. So yeah, send me a message if you want a question asked. That's not too out of the PG line, but no, thanks for having me, guys. I've loved it. It's been good fun.
Listen, pleasure's been all ours, George. I'd say so sorry it's taken so long, mate. I'd say it's been lovely having you on. I'm sure Matt will agree. I think it's always brilliant, Matt, to get somebody on that, like I say, in George's standing, when you're in those Ange pressers week upon week, it's always, I think, a different opinion than what you may get from, again, with no disrespect, when you get a lot of the nationals that go in and around different grounds. This ain't different about having someone that's week to week there of Ange. You know what I mean, Matt, on that basis?
Yeah, for sure. I think we often speak about how press conferences come across in the 10-15 minute clips you might see on social media, but I always find actually speaking to the journalist who has that more of a personal connection to what's going on and maybe can read the vibe in the room a little bit more is always fascinating insight. It's been brilliant, George. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Oh, man. And I made this point. As soon as I leave and hang up now and pass the reins over to Matt, they'll sign 3 or 4 players the minute I hit the beach. But the thing is, as George will know, having a little one, you don't get time to hit the beach these days. You're trying to look after the kids and run around. So there probably won't be any beach activity, but we'll see what it brings us in 45-degree Cyprus weather. We will. A slight update for you before we do go. Fabrizio Romano has just tweeted that AC Milan had new contacts with Tottenham for Emerson Royale. There's still almost a 3 million difference between the fee offered and proposal received. Personal terms agreed in May. Talks still ongoing between the two clubs. I do wonder if I come back and that's still rolling on, and when I come back, there'll be a 2.5 million, 1 million. The nature of Spurs and the transfer window says it all. I want to say a massive thank you to Matt and the brilliant George Sessions. George, thank you so much, mate. We'll hopefully catch up with you. January time be lovely to see how things are getting on, and with an all review on all things Spurs. We'll see how we get on.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll be through to the Europa League quarterfinals by then. We'll be top of the league, and then it'll go downhill. But it's fun. It's been it'll be great to come back on, and I think there's a lot to be positive about. Let's a couple more signings in, and we can all go into the season and get White Lane rocking again.
Love that, George. Thank you so much. Well, as things stand, Spurs are set to announce Yang as their 4th signing of the summer. I am off on a break. Matt is on the takeover. From myself, my wonderful mate Hayes, from the brilliant George Sessions. Guys, thank you so much for all your support for the show. From us all, please keep safe, keep well, and as always, come on, you Spurs.